Hello, my name is Michael Bogart. Our goal at MindCuisine is to help you understand various topics and issues which impact our lives and our world. Understanding these key issues is important for at least two reasons. First, because we live in a world of non-stop ideas, controversies, and information overload, we often need a reliable source who can explain core concepts and condense information to manageable portions. Secondly, all of us need to grow as people. And whether it involves being stretched intellectually, encouraged emotionally, or even changed in some of our attitudes, transformation is vital to meeting the challenges of life. And MindCuisine's role is to jumpstart some of this for you as we teach, explain, and highlight the issues which are important to us all. Islam is the fastest growing of the major world religions. Today there are more than 1.2 billion Muslims in the world, and Islam is growing rapidly in Europe, in Africa, and among certain groups in the United States and Canada. Muslim people are coming to North America and Europe from many places in the world to study, to set up businesses, to take positions of leadership, and to work in every sector of the economy. Muslims are building mosques, those are their places of worship, and they are purchasing homes in many neighborhoods. So it is in the interests of Westerners to be informed about what these folks are all about. Well, I certainly don't aspire to make experts out of everyone in a single brief session. But what we are going to try to accomplish is to inform you about the basic beliefs and practices of Islam so that you will be able to do the following things. First, so that you can read about Islam in newspaper articles, magazines, books, and the internet, and understand what is being said without feeling like you're listening to some kind of foreign language. Secondly, so that you can talk intelligently about the subject of Islam with those around you. And thirdly, so that you may interact with Muslim people without undue fear of them or their intentions. Islam is essentially a religion of teachings and regulations said to have been given by Allah, that's the Arabic word for God, through the Prophet Muhammad. And people are expected to surrender to and live by these rules and teachings in order to accomplish Allah's will. In fact, the Arabic word Islam is a form of the word peace, salam, and in the form Islam means surrender or submission. So when a person submits to Allah and joins Islam, he or she is referred to as a Muslim, a person surrendered to God's will. Islam states that Muhammad was not the only prophet by which Allah revealed himself. Over the course of history, Allah is said to have revealed his will to many people, including Adam, Moses, David, and even Jesus. But Islam teaches that the supreme and final revelation was through the Prophet Muhammad. So, how did Islam originate? Muslims would say that Islam was practiced long before Muhammad's time, going back as far as Adam in the Garden of Eden. Indeed, most scholars agree that Islam does have roots which can be traced back to the patriarch Abraham, who lived around 4,000 years ago. And that means that Islam is related to Judaism and Christianity through their common roots that these traditions share in the faith of Abraham. Let me see if I can paint a word picture for you illustrating this relationship. In your mind, picture a tree with two main branches. The roots of the tree represent Abraham's faith, his personal faith in the God of the Bible. The trunk of the tree represents the religion of ancient Israel, which really begins with Moses and the receiving of Israel's laws and teachings called the Torah. Ancient Israelite religion continues with Samuel, King David, the prophets, and toward the end with Ezra the priest. Well, the tree forks into its branches because of several issues, which caused the split between Judaism and Christianity. The first of these issues is the identity of Jesus of Nazareth. According to the New Testament portion of the Bible, Jesus made certain claims indicating that he was the hoped-for Messiah of Israel. There were also narratives concerning Jesus' miracles and his physical resurrection. The Jews of the first century experienced a major falling out over the issue of who Jesus was. The majority denied these claims that he made, and they are the originators of Judaism as it has been known over the past couple of thousand years. A small minority at first, but growing into many thousands by the second century, believed Jesus' claims. They founded the nucleus of the early Christian church, which was exclusively Jewish for several years until its ranks were swelled by the growing number of Gentiles who came into it. Gentiles means non-Jews. The second issue is the destruction of Israel's temple in 70 of the current era by the Romans. This event forced the Jews to adapt their religion to a new situation in which no animal sacrifice was possible and in which no priesthood was needed. Modern rabbinic Judaism was the result. And Christianity was minimally affected by the temple's destruction because the followers of Jesus were far less tied to the temple in Jerusalem due to their belief that the death of Jesus was the only sacrifice they needed. So there we have our tree, roots, trunk, and two main branches. But where does Islam fit into this picture? Well, if you're familiar with agricultural terms, you may have heard the term sprout. A sprout is a fresh growth which can form from the roots of an existing tree. So if you will, Islam can be pictured as a sprout coming up from the roots of Abraham's faith. It has no connection to the trunk or to the branches, but it may have a slender tie with the patriarch Abraham, whom the Bible and Arabic tradition claim is the ancestor of at least some of the Arabic tribes as well as of the Jews. The Hanif tradition, which existed alongside the main Arab religion in ancient times, sought a single creator deity. And this Hanif tradition may be that slender tie with Abraham's faith. Now, although there had apparently always been this slender tradition of Arabic monotheism, and by the way, monotheism means the worship of only one deity, by the time of Muhammad, the Arabic tribes were almost completely polytheistic, and that is, they worshipped a variety of gods and goddesses. Their religion would have been similar in some ways to Greek and Roman paganism, Zeus, Athena, Aphrodite, and the rest. So along comes Muhammad. The facts of his life as they are now known are as follows. Muhammad was born in the western Arabian city of Mecca sometime between 570 and 571 of the current era. He was a member of the Hashemite clan of the influential Quraysh tribe. His father and mother had both died by the time he was a small child, and so he was taken in by relatives. But he was always seen as a marginal sort of person due to his unfortunate circumstances. Muhammad apparently never received any formal schooling, so he was illiterate all his life. As a young man, he was known as Al-Amin, which means the trustworthy one, because of his serious and straightforward character. And he was apprenticed to the caravan trade and became in due time an experienced caravan leader, visiting places like Jerusalem and Damascus. At age 25, he accepted a proposal of marriage from Khadijah, the widowed owner of the caravan that he led. Now, although she was 12 to 15 years his senior, their relationship appears to have been one of mutual love and respect. She believed that she had married a most unusual young man, and he deeply respected her status, insight, and opinions. Then came Muhammad's religious quest. As a young man, Muhammad seems to have become dissatisfied with the Arabic religion. And just as it is today, the city of Mecca was a place of religious pilgrimage at the time, except that in its holy shrine, the Kaaba, it featured the images of 360 gods and goddesses, and Mecca made its living chiefly from the visitors who would come to the shrine each year. Now, in his travels, Muhammad had certainly met Christians. They had been around for nearly 600 years by this time and were well established in Arabia and nearby lands. He had also known Jews because of the Jewish colonies scattered throughout various Arabian cities. And of course, the Jews had been around even longer than the Christians had. Muhammad may have been intrigued by the monotheistic beliefs of these two groups. He certainly had some basic knowledge of what Jews and Christians believed and practiced. And yet he wasn't entirely satisfied. Now, there may have been some jealousy on the part of some Arabs at the idea that the true God had spoken to the Jews and others, but not to them. And maybe that was part of why Muhammad decided to seek religious truth on his own. As a man of means after his marriage, Muhammad could afford to spend extended time in fasting, prayer, and other religious activities. Near Mecca, there was a cave where Muhammad often spent time fasting, praying, and seeking truth during the month of Ramadan. And then in the year 610 of the current era, something happened which Muslims refer to as the Night of Power. Well, the accounts are somewhat confused about the exact details, but it would seem that an angelic spirit calling itself Jibril, identified with the angel Gabriel of the Old and New Testaments, appeared to Muhammad in the cave. It held him, squeezed the breath from him, laid on him, and nearly crushed him 3 times, commanding him to recite in the name of Allah. And this means that he was being asked to compose and recite in Arabic verse words given him by the true God. And by the way, Allah simply means the God. Well, Muhammad protested 3 times that he couldn't do this because he was illiterate. And after the experience ended, he hurried home to his wife, shaking with fear and telling her that he had seen what he thought at the time to be an evil spirit. Well, she questioned him and concluded that since he was such an unusually trustworthy man, an evil spirit would not appear to him. So it must have been a messenger from the true God. She told him to go back to the cave and do what the spirit instructed. Over the following years, Muhammad had many visions in which he received bits and pieces of the Arabic poetry that would eventually become the Quran, which is the Muslim Holy Scripture. Now, though he could neither read nor write, his followers wrote down what he recited. For 12 years he preached and warned the inhabitants of Mecca, denouncing their religion and lifestyle. And you can imagine that as time went by, public opinion turned against him and his small band of followers. His life was threatened. And in the 12 years that he'd been preaching, he gained no more than a handful of followers. So the prospects for the tiny Islamic group were pretty dim. Then in the year 622 of the current era, a delegation from the city of Yathrib, several days' journey to the north, approached Muhammad with a proposal. Would he come and settle a devastating tribal dispute that had broken out among them? Muhammad agreed on the condition that the city would become Islamic. He and his followers fled Mecca for this new refuge, later renamed Medina, the city, or the city of the Prophet. In Medina, the first Islamic community, or Ummah, was established under the laws revealed in the Quran, and those laws are referred to as Sharia. Islam therefore makes our year 622 the year 1 in its calendar, and it counts the Islamic community as starting on this date of the Ummah's flight, or hijrah, to Medina. During the year that followed, the Muslims of Medina were attacked by the Meccans, who were ultimately defeated in several battles. And the terms of surrender were that Mecca become the second Islamic city, and its shrine would be cleansed of its idols and become a center for the worship of Allah. By 632, all of Arabia had submitted to the message and the might of Islam. But something else significant happened in that year of 632. The Prophet died suddenly, leaving no clear instructions on who would assume the leadership of Islam. Well, the upshot was that the respected men of the Islamic community chose by consensus a series of 4 leaders called caliphs. And these included Abu Bakr, Omar, Uthman, and Ali. And in the time of the 4th caliph, Ali, Islam had split into its 2 major groups: the Sunnis, who would accept the teachings and examples of all the caliphs, and the Shia or Shiites, who accept only the leadership of Ali. In the centuries that followed, Islam would make a series of startling conquests. All of North Africa and the Middle East would be Islamic by the end of the 600s. In the West, Islamic armies conquered most of Spain and Portugal by the year 718, and they overflowed into France, where they were ultimately defeated by the Frankish armies and turned back into Spain at the Battle of Tours in 732. And for several hundred years, Spanish Andalusia became a major Islamic center in the West and dominated the smaller Christian kingdoms in the north. Islamic culture and Arabic language have had a very significant influence on both Spain and Portugal. In the east, Persia fell, and the Muslim armies marched into northern India and on into Central Asia. From there, Muslim merchants sailed to Southeast Asia, where the Malays and the Indonesians became Islamic, with Islamic influence extending all the way to the southern Philippine Islands. As I mentioned a few moments ago, in his visions, Muhammad is said to have received inspiration from Allah, which his followers wrote down and stored for safekeeping. The pieces received by Muhammad were compiled into their present form a decade or so after the Prophet's death, during the time of the Caliph Uthman. And the Quran has remained essentially unchanged since the mid-7th century. According to many Muslims, the fact that Muhammad was illiterate is proof that the Quran must be from Allah, since no one without training could compose such beautiful poetry. Islam insists that to truly understand the Quran, it must be recited and studied in Arabic, since translation devalues and distorts it. Islam's basic practices include the 5 pillars. And the first of these pillars is confession. Confession that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his supreme messenger. Now, this confession is to be said in Arabic upon conversion and repeated several times daily for the rest of a Muslim's life. And Muslims call this Shahada. The second pillar are prayers to be said 5 times daily. These prayers are formulaic in that they are memorized and repeated at set times, particularly in unison with other Muslims who are also praying. Muslims call this Salah. The third pillar is that 1/40th of a person's annual income is to be given to the poor. That's about 2.5%. Muslims call this zakat. The fourth pillar is that Muslims are to fast and observe various abstentions. They call this Saum. And the most well-known period of fasting is during the daylight hours of the month of Ramadan. This month of Ramadan slowly rotates around the standard Western calendar due to the fact that Muslims religiously observe 12 30-day months. In the early 21st century, Ramadan has occurred in the autumn. Fifthly, if possible, all Muslims are required to make at least one pilgrimage to Mecca during their lifetime. The pilgrimage, called the Hajj, involves visits to holy sites, including the Kaaba, ritual animal sacrifice, as well as other kinds of religious observances. Now, some of the more radical branches of Islam sometimes add jihad as a 6th pillar. In Arabic, jihad means struggle, and usually it has the significance of the inner struggle to live correctly. However, jihad can also refer to the outward armed struggle to defend and spread Islam. And the Quran uses the word jihad in both senses. Well, those are the 5 pillars. There are various other basic Islamic practices I should also mention. Muslims are also required, for example, to observe various dietary rules, including a non-pork diet, as well as approved meats, which are slaughtered and processed in approved ways. And that, by the way, is called halal. Halal is in some ways similar to Jewish kosher regulations. And there's also to be no use of alcohol. In addition, Muslims live by other lifestyle regulations such as no involvement in gambling. And though it approves of polygamy, polygamy means a man having multiple wives, it restricts the total of wives to 4 with the provision that all should be treated equally. Women are to dress modestly to avoid attracting the attention of men other than their husbands. Well, now let's look at some of the key doctrines of Islam. What does Islam teach, for example, about the character of God? Well, according to Islam, Allah is supreme and indivisible. He is alone. He had no son. How could he have a son since he has no wife? God is pictured as sovereign and unknowable. He is moral and jealous. He is often referred to by one of his 99 wonderful names, such as the merciful, the compassionate, the majestic, the guardian, and so forth. And Muslims explain that Allah's compassion is shown in warning us that judgment is coming and in sending his prophet to instruct. How about Scripture? Well, the Quran is composed of 114 surahs, those are chapters, further subdivided into ayah, verses. The true Quran is in heaven, and Muhammad received the only valid copy of it. Arabic is the only language capable of capturing its essence, and translation into another language essentially devalues it. The Quran was meant to be chanted rather than read silently. It was compiled and standardized a decade or so after Muhammad's death by the Caliph Uthman. Now add to this as a source for Islamic doctrine the accepted hadiths, which are a body of traditional sayings and life examples called the Sunnah of Muhammad and his early followers during that 10 years of the Prophet's rule over the Ummah in Medina. The Old and New Testaments are respected, but are considered tainted and unreliable. Moving on to the subject of judgment. There is an impending judgment day coming for all people, and people will be judged by their intentions and their actions, then rewarded with the pleasures of paradise on the one hand, or the punishments of hell. Let's talk about the office of prophet. Muslims claim that Allah has sent 124,000 prophets to every community on earth to warn them. Those are called Nabi. But there are only 28 true messengers, Rasul, named from Adam to Muhammad, who transmitted a message binding on an entire generation. And of these 28 Rasul, 5 are the greatest: Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad. Muhammad is the final and supreme messenger of Allah. His teachings, sayings, and actions are considered to be divinely inspired. What about the issue of Jesus? Well, Muslims see Jesus as only a man, though indeed virgin born. His crucifixion and resurrection were considered to be unreal, and Jesus preached Islam and Sharia law. What about the other Abrahamic faiths? Well, Muslims consider Jews and Christians to be heretics who cling to partial truth. And though they are protected under Islamic law as people of the book, they are still considered to be deceived. Let's talk about the issue of what is wrong with people. Well, according to Islam, the human problem is not primarily sin. Now, people do sin in that they violate Allah's will and law, but they do so out of pride and pettiness, stubbornness and laziness, rather than out of a nature in rebellion. Taqwa means getting over self-will and submitting to Allah's will. And according to Islam, the prophets came to teach us taqwa. Let's talk about the doctrine of angels. Islam's view of angels and demons is actually very similar to the classic views of Judaism and Christianity on that subject. For example, they believe that a biblical angel was the tool used to reveal the Quran to Muhammad. And they see Satan as the chief of the fallen angels or demons. Now let's deal with the branches of Islam. As I said earlier, the two main branches of Islam are Sunni and Shia. Sunni Islam accounts for approximately 85% of the Muslims worldwide, and Shia Islam makes up about 15%, mainly in the countries of Iran, Yemen, and parts of Iraq. And the two groups differ over which of the early caliphs were rightly guided by Allah and therefore legitimate successors to Muhammad in leading all of Islam. So as a result of the differences in which of the caliphs' leadership they follow, Sunni and Shia have somewhat different interpretations of certain portions of the Quran, which in turn result in different customs, traditions, and practices. And each of these main branches has numerous subgroups with their own unique traditions and interpretations as well. I should also mention the practice of Sufism within Islam. Now, Sufism is a form of mysticism common in either of the two main branches, Sunni or Shia. And Sufis strive to experience the supernatural and to personally enter the presence of God. We should also mention Islamic fundamentalism. Islamic fundamentalists can be found in either of the branches as well. The Islamic groups which advocate the use of force to defend Islam and coercion in the spreading of their faith cite various passages in the Quran which may be interpreted as permitting such things. Now, historians have argued that Muhammad himself used military tactics to defend the movement and even to subjugate reluctant peoples. And certainly the early Muslim armies used force in their rapid conquest and subjugation of various people groups in the 7th century and beyond. Now, within Islamic fundamentalism, the modern movement from which many of the radical groups spring is known as Wahhabism, founded by Saudi scholar Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab in the mid-1700s. And in the defeat of his followers, the Wahhabis, by the Ottoman Empire in the latter part of that century, the survivors went underground in various countries and formed the basis for many of the fundamentalist and radical groups in countries like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and the rest. Islamic fundamentalists tend to oppose the West and Western culture for several reasons. First, because of the real or perceived oppression of Muslim countries and of Islam in general by Western nations. Now, there are examples which could be cited of Western nations setting and implementing policies which can be seen as detrimental to Muslim interests. Secondly, Muslim fundamentalists oppose the West because of the real or perceived decadence of our culture and its influence on Muslim people. For example, the West attempts to export its products to Muslim countries, and some of these products are seen as incompatible with an Islamic way of life. However, it is the exportation of Western ideas which often have been highly objectionable because of their clash with the teachings and practices of Islam. And though people in Muslim countries have sometimes embraced elements of Western culture, those of a more purist mindset have felt that such influences should be stopped so that people will return to Islamic ways, at least as the purists understand them. And of course, the third bone of contention is over the consistent support of Western nations for the country of Israel, which is seen to be an unacceptable presence in the region. Let's wrap this up. Islam is a religion based upon the teachings said to have been given through the Prophet Muhammad by Allah. People are expected to surrender to and live by these teachings in order to accomplish Allah's will. Islam is based primarily on the Quran, which records the revelations of Muhammad. And from this and other sources comes Sharia, or Islamic law and practice. All Muslims practice the 5 pillars of confession, prayers, giving of alms, fasting, and pilgrimage to Mecca, as well as other dietary and lifestyle regulations. Muslims are divided into 2 basic groups, the Sunnis and the Shiites, who follow different traditions based upon which of the early leaders of Islam they believe truly spoke for Allah. Not all Muslims are fundamentalists in the sense of insisting on the original Arabian form of the religion as it developed under its early leaders. Neither are all Muslims hostile to outsiders. The fact that many Muslim people are living and working in the West, North America, Europe, and other westernized countries shows that many of them believe that they can live a valid Islamic life in a pluralistic society and that they can do so in harmony with their non-Muslim neighbors. So how should non-Muslims relate to the Muslim people that they may meet? Well, first, it simply is not true that all Muslims are enemies of Western culture. So don't suspect them necessarily of having sinister motives. Be polite. After all, a kind gesture, if it's understood as such, is a pretty universal language. In Muslim culture, acts expressing thoughtfulness and generosity are valued and appreciated as signs of friendship. And if you're interested, you might ask about their culture. I should point out that not all Muslims are Arabs. Muslims come from many places in the world and many types of people. So Muslim culture varies considerably and can provide a rich and fascinating experience. For example, there are Muslims in China, Indonesia, Iran, and various countries in Africa and Europe, all of which may vary in significant ways from one another, and all of them based in one way or another on the Quran. And then, I suggest being confident in your own culture. Don't fall prey to the pressure of feeling that you must always apologize as a Westerner, especially for the positive aspects of our culture. Now, don't get me wrong. We Westerners have plenty to correct in our culture and plenty to repent of in our history. But let's face it, not everything about the West is bad. On the other hand, be ready. You may be called upon to explain things they do not understand. And it can be very revealing to explain something that we Westerners take for granted, such as what we eat, the types of entertainment we enjoy, or the relations between men and women in our culture. Sometimes we assume that ours is the right way or the best way. And seeing things from another person's point of view, well, it may not change what you think, but it can certainly give perspective to it. Well, that concludes our session on Basic Islam. Thank you for your attention. I hope you learned a lot. If you're interested in more subjects like this and more video seminars, go to our website, www.mindcuisine.com. Meanwhile, stay curious.